1986's Invisible Touch is pretty much the point of no return for people who profess to be major hardcore fans of the rock group Genesis, old school fans of the progressive rock era, or the ones who've looked back at retrospectively trying to get into progressive rock via the internet, and they hear about the stuff from the 80s and they go, oh, it's garbage. They may not have even grown up with it. I didn't in the 80s, and I was born afterward. I didn't necessarily hear these particular songs plastered all over the radio in, classic rock or, classic FM radio, that sort of thing. But you would hear Phil Collins solo tunes. I had the fortune, I'm giving away a few thoughts on this album, I had the fortune of not having to hear some of these songs on the radio until I never heard many of these songs. I don't think I heard any of these songs until I went out of my way to listen to this album one day, just being a fan of Selling England by the Pound and Landless down on Broadway. You eventually get through the other Genesis material, and I grew to really appreciate Duke and Abacab. They're amazing, actually. I will say that. That's my take. Self-titled, well, I've uploaded a video on Self-Titled. I consider it a disappointment, although there's elements I appreciate about Self-Titled, to be sure. And Invisible Touch, yes, there is elements of Invisible Touch that I appreciate. Although it's when they went into absolute pop sterility and decided that it was all about hooks, and not even great hooks, to be honest. Just mass appeal, stadium music, and this idea that... And here's the thing, they thought they were making music as spiritual, as artful, and deep and meaningful as their old music. They felt what Patrick Bateman was talking about in the novel American Psycho and the subsequent, probably even more famous film adaptation. I'm not a big fan of either, but I do really like that. I'm more interested in the novel's take on his response to Body Double. I think that's really interesting, but and sick and gruesome and all that. But it's morbidly fascinating, and the Invisible Touch thing. Invisible Touch is almost more famous now in the internet age for the Patrick Bateman memes, so to speak. Although I do sincerely think it's not just a matter of satirizing. I don't know if Bret Easton Ellis realized. I mean, obviously he was poking fun at people who were trying to... They'd read rock reviews, things like Rolling Stone magazine, Village Voice. I don't think Village Voice would give Invisible Touch a good review, really, but I've read these press outlets, these record companies have paid these music critics to give Invisible Touch a good review, I suspect. Oh yeah, hooks, yeah. It's just so dumb. And then Patrick Bateman's decided that he wants to sound sophisticated, so he parrots all this stuff, and he parrots music critic nonsense. Here's the thing, I suspect the band also felt the way Patrick Bateman feels about the music they were making. Yeah, tonight, yeah, Invisible Touch, yeah, in too deep. It's meaningful. It's about relationships. It's got nothing on Peter Gabriel's works on the first 4 albums, although this was released the same year as So, and I'm not the biggest fan of So, unfortunately. So's and Peter Gabriel got a bit corporate, CEO, Buddhist meditation retreat sort of thing. The kind of things I was joking about in Rush's Hold Your Fire. Dare I say Invisible Touch is a more interesting album than So because of the production. I love the Hugh Padgham sound. I love how it's an expansion to part 2, a sequel to Abacab's production specifically. I love all the electronic percussion on the album, even on garbage songs. Let's just go over the track list quickly so we have an idea of what my frames of reference are, my points when referring and talking to about this album. The title track, the opening song Invisible Touch, is horrendous. It's the most famous song Genesis ever made, apparently. I never heard a Genesis song until I went out of my way to hear one. I heard Phil Collins songs, but I was born in '96, so I'm long past this, and maybe Australia didn't get as much Genesis on the radio. I don't know. You started hearing Land of Confusion 2020, COVID-19 onward. But Invisible Touch is horrible, and Tonight is actually kind of amazing. It's so superficial and 80s and you can imagine someone with a hi-fi stereo system. It's they're trying to be spiritual. They've got this whole thing set up, Patrick Bateman listening to Tonight, and it's how spiritual are you? You needed all this money and expensive materials in order to make this happen. This is ridiculous. But Tonight is just a track. As an accomplishment, as a listening experience, it's too much ear candy to not be ridiculous fun. Land of Confusion is corny. That spitting image video, that's terrifying and creepy. But the song itself, I don't know, like, my generation will put it right. Your generation became the problem in the end. I don't know. In Too Deep. Oh my god, let's not even go there. Anything she does is not a good song, but it's fun in a stupid power pop way. I've seen a silly Benny Hill video. Most of the tracks on this album have a video. It's almost like you can almost watch Invisible Touch the movie, except there's no video for the Brazilian, and I don't think there's a video for Throwing It All Away. Domino, I'm not sure, but I know I'm pretty sure the first 5 tracks, I'm pretty sure, all have videos, and there's 8 tracks on the album. It's almost like they wanted to do this Hard Day's Night thing. Here's the thing: Genesis in the '80s, even though they were like in their 30s on, they thought they were the Beatles. They thought they were so famous and iconic and brilliant. They really wanted to just be the Beatles, I think, as a friend of mine has pointed that out. It's probably true. Anything she does, it's stupid power pop in the bad, cheap trick, status quo vein, not necessarily the good vein, like Only Ones, or I'm making fun of power pop, I ought not to. But yeah, anything she oh, it's so bad, but like, it's kind of good. No, it's not. Moving on. Domino. Could it be that we shall be together again? I can get into Domino. Yeah, why not? Dun, 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 dun. Gotta go down there. Yeah, Domino. I mean, a Genesis song that's over like 6 minutes is usually a good thing, except on We Can't Dance, but we're not going to go there. Like, we're never going to go to We Can't Dance. I'm not listening to that again for the sake of any reviews. Sorry. Throwing It All Away. It's more tolerable than In Too Deep. That's all I'll say. And the Brazilian is genius. It's like one of the great Tony Banks tracks on The Fugitive, like the instrumental. What's the instrumental on The Fugitive called? It's brilliant. Let me just give me a moment. Charm. It's like a lesser budgeted YMO song, you could say. Oh, by the way, rest in peace both Reichi Sakamoto and, early in the year, Yukihiro Takahashi, the brilliant drummer of the group. All have amazing solo careers, as well as Hosono, the other member of YMO, Yellow Magic Orchestra. I could go on a brief spiel about Yellow Magic Orchestra, but I want to stay on the topic at hand, so we'll save Yellow Magic Orchestra for some other time, I suppose. But yes, the Brazilian. The Brazilian apparently was a staple of the British television's BBC sports coverage of some athletics festival in the late 80s. And you can just imagine all this slow-mo footage to the Brazilian, it's so of the time, but it's so beautiful. It's such it's an exemplar. It's a test demo of their new studio, The Farm in Chiddingfold, Surrey, was capable of, and it's such a bastion of the Hugh Padgham production. And I have to say, I absolutely love it. The Brazilian is the best thing on here, and it may be the best composition. I don't know if it's the best composition Genesis put out in the 80s, but it's one of my favorites. I think there's stuff on Duke and Abacab that's more impressive, so Keep It Dark, or Dodo Lurker and Abacab. Maybe the Behind the Lines on Duke is an extraordinary pop song, and I'm also very fond of Turn It On Again is genius, I think, also. But Invisible Touch, yeah, it's if you ever wanted to time travel back to 1986, I suspect you just need to play this album. I think it felt like this album, I suspect. If you want to be in the mode, it's just fascinating to me that, like, it's not just, how, like, we get to the point in the 80s where, we're in the era of the compact disc, we're getting to a point where albums are less about, you put it on, it's like, audio photo albums. Eric Davis, obviously that was plausibly, definitely why they named it an LP, an album. But Eric Davis, was outlining this in the Led Zeppelin 4 book very, very eloquently, more than I will. I'll just move on from that for now. I'd like to emphasize how in the 70s or 60s, you sat down with the album, and there's no other means of playing long-form music other than the radio, and the radio could be hit or miss, maybe playing stuff that you've heard a bunch before, and stuff that you wouldn't hear on these albums. So you wanted to hear what the artist had to say over the course of the 40-odd minutes or so, 2 sides of an LP. And in the 80s, it became more just about, singles and MTV, and so you're really buying albums for the single, and you were just like, everything else is just filler. They'd be like, all right, you got a hit single out, put it an LP out, we'll make some money off of that as well. That seems to be the American model. I think it's a bit different in the UK. They liked singles and then would promote an album of entirely different songs. So UK bands probably a bit better with this, I would say. an American bands, just from my retrospective analysis of it in a kind of pseudo-archaeological, digital sort of internet sense. But what we got with Invisible Touch was, I think, thoroughly, just like the other Genesis albums, this experience, you need to listen to it as an album experience, like a progressive rock LP. They thought they could have it both ways, of the best of both worlds. They wanted to have the old fans still on board with, like, yeah, this artistic experience, yeah, what's going on here? You can feel it, it's spiritual, it's now, it's deep. But now it sounds like superficial 80s pop, like they're trying to fit in and cash in and sell out, more or less. But they also wanted to have, we'll buy it for the singles, and people just play it at parties and stuff, and, people are like, oh yeah, that song, oh yeah, that song, oh yeah, that song. And it's just a collection of the hit songs you hear on the radio, and the album is an art form. It's just like a convenient place to have hit singles rather than an actual work of expression in its own right, where the tracks become pieces in a suite rather than just selections in a compilation disc, I don't know, I'm being a bit silly right now, I suppose. The death of the album, the apotheosis of everything to do with the 1980s that we decided to move on from. When things are considered 80s 1980s in a retro sense, in a popular pop retro sense, it's evoking things that, it's like, oh, that was fun in the 80s, but like, we wouldn't necessarily do it now. It's like we got different production techniques. We won't have to rely on the same sort of technology that they thought would be just around forever in the 80s. The album that's emblematic of these things and elements that we won't necessarily want to keep around, that's Invisible Touch by Genesis, really. It's sterile pop silliness with a bit of how does it make you feel sheen about it too. What more could you want? I don't know. But if you do, we may not get a time machine in any of our lifetimes, although, if you want to get back to 1986 at least for about 40 odd minutes, there's Invisible Touch on YouTube, Worth a try. Or not. You have to, because it means listening to Invisible Touch, and I wasn't around in 1986, but it's I don't need to stay there forever. I mean, I do appreciate the experience, the privilege of getting to time travel via Invisible Touch is nice, I suppose. I'll grant it that it's unique there.